Before the video starts, I just wanted to say that I do stream on Twitch every night starting right around 8 p.m. Central Standard Time. Twitch.tv/deadredhead. I hope to see some of you guys there. Let's get into the guide. Thank you for stopping by. So, in today's video, we're going to be covering your tanks or front lines. These guys are going to be the ones that are standing, all the way up front, either on point or causing some kind of disruption in the enemy's backline. There's two very distinct splits in the frontline or tank category, and that's going to be your point tanks and your off tanks. So to start, a couple of point tanks are going to be someone like Barrack, right? He's got a barricade, 3,750 health, rocket boots that can also be used to heal and shield yourself with certain cards. His turrets, he's good at setting up the point and holding it. You also have someone like Anara, who gets damage reduction, so she doesn't take as much damage. She's got a warder's field that, again, creates this area that's hard to get into and hard to fight through. She also creates a big wall that can just completely block the enemy's way to a point off. On the other side, your off tanks, right? You're going to have someone like Terminus. So he's got his power siphon. He puts up a big funnel in front of him. All enemy attacks, or most of them, not all of them, most of them, are absorbed in Calamity, which he can use to shoot out of his hand to do damage. He's also got his his movement skill. He leaps into the air, smashes down. It's got a decent jump distance too. This can be used as, a gap closer or getting into the backline to disrupt. You also have someone like Rom, who is another off tank. He's all about shredding an enemy and using that as extra health. It's as a shield. And then he uses his Juggernaut to, run through the enemy and just disrupt the backline, again, as a off tank is supposed to. The big difference between the off tanks and the point tanks. The point tanks are going to excel at, pushing up, getting an area locked down, and holding it. The off tank is going to try and support them in doing that by either sticking with your backline, your DPS or healer, and making sure that they stay alive, and we can keep the flankers off of them and open or create and take opportunities when they're presented. Or another way to do that would be to just, especially like Rom, he really excels at this, and just running into the enemy backline when you have an opening, and making sure that the enemy DPS or healer aren't in a good enough position to have value. You're trying to take them out of the fight, whether that be through elimination or just being in the way, to allow your point tank and your DPS and healer to excel at what they need to do. This all plays a very big role in how a game's going to play out. In my opinion, it's a pretty hard role to get down and master. There's a lot of balancing between whether or not you should be pushing up and doing damage and disrupting, or if you should be with your team holding that point down. It's this balance between, being offensive but being defensive, making sure that the enemy team doesn't have the availability and efficiency that they want, while also making sure that your team is able to keep up with that. There's quite a few more tanks. They all play different roles, and it's important to have both an off tank and a main tank. You can get away with it if you in lower elos, but the higher you go, it's going to be a lot more difficult. All right, so what I'm going to do is break down 6 different tips or thoughts that you should be, thinking of throughout the game to help you succeed in whether it be, point tanking or off tanking. The first one that I'm going to recommend is be aware. What this means is you need to be paying attention to what's going on in the game around you. It's very easy, especially as an off tank or point tank, to get really wrapped up in what you're doing and tunnel vision on that, thinking that you're making a good play, and a lot of times you can be, but what could happen is while you're focused on getting that point or disrupting the backline, their flankers and their DPS are just causing havoc in your backline. And you may not realize it at first because, again, you are focusing on what you think you should be doing as a tank. It's easy to get wrapped up, as I said before. Stuff like you're low and you really need healing, but you're pushed so far up that your healer's been taken out by their enemy flank. What are you going to do now, right? Is it because their flanking duo on the enemy team is pushing your backline while you're holding point, or in their backline and taking out yours? Stuff like this, you need to be able to think about and analyze what's going on around you. Um, Even something as simple as is the champion Khan, he keeps grabbing you or your backline with an ult and just getting rid of them out of the team fight completely. While you're focusing on their backline and taking care of what you believe needs to be done, that Khan is causing so much problem in your backline that what you're doing isn't going to matter. You also need to think about how far you're pushed up. If you're pushed up too far that your healer can't get to you without putting themselves in absolute danger, you're not going to be able to get healed. It's as simple as that. While you are a frontline and you're not the only one on the team, even if you're not doing what you believe is the most important thing, something as simple as keeping your backline alive can completely change the way the game's going and change the pace of the game. The second tip I want to talk about, and it's going to sound kind of strange, but know your role. You have two types of tanks. You have your point tanks and your off tanks. You need to pay attention, depending on which one you're playing, on what you're doing. Point tanks are going to be more suited towards holding down that objective and not letting the enemy take it. You know, Anara, Barrack, even Terminus can play point tank. But their ability to take a lot of damage and punishment without dying can swing the way the fight's going. On the other side, your off tanks, these guys like Atlas, Ruckus, Rom, they're not really gonna be suited for holding down that point. But instead, you're gonna want to push forward or, if needed, support your backline. If they're getting flanked on or there's a lot of issues going on back there that you need to be able to take care of. Off tanks, you kind of want to play them with one of your flankers, maybe one of your DPS. Help them do what they need to do, enable them to make plays. When playing off tanks really well, you're going to make room for your team to push up. You're going to set up their team set up their team for your team to be able to crossfire into, split their attention from the point tank. So you're pulling the attention from the point tank so the point tank can, open that zone up and really lock it down. This prevents, the enemy from pushing through to it and being able to get to point or get onto your backline and take them out of the fight. It all just depends on what you're playing and how you're playing it. So the third tip that I'm going to suggest, and it's going to sound very contradictory, but sometimes you need to get off the point. I know you're a point tank. I know I've said to hold that point, but sometimes it is not worth sacrificing your life holding that point when you could just do something as simple as fall back, give your healer a chance to get to you to heal you and get back in the fight instead of staggering your death over and over again where you're not doing much good. You just need to get off the point, give up that little bit of percent that they're going to get. Maybe you need to give them 50, 60, 70% of the point to be able to set your team up to take that fight successfully. Even just sitting on the point and not doing anything, but you're getting that extra percent isn't going to help you in the long run. It doesn't matter how much percent you get on that point if you don't capture it. Yeah, it looks good to, get to 90%, but if you get to that 90% and then die because you're stubborn with and staying on that point instead of backing up and giving the rest of your team a chance to catch up, it doesn't matter. It's all gone to nothing. You die, the rest of your team dies, your DPS, your healers, your flankers, your off tank. Everyone's done. They get the point for free from there on. So sometimes it's going to be better to just give up that point for a minute, regroup with your team, back up to get healing, whatever it is you need, and then take the fight back. Take the point back. Go in for those fights. But you have to understand that just standing on the point isn't always going to be the best thing to do. The fourth tip is to take action. You may have a shield, Barik, Ash, Anara with her wall, Terminus with his power siphon, whatever it is. That does not mean that's your only job. If you're playing someone like Ash, for example, push forward, knock the enemies back, disrupt them, keep them from getting into a position where they can really cause damage to the rest of your team. If you're playing, Atlas, rewind people that push your team, push them back, give your team a chance to breathe, set up, and do what they need to do. You're more than just a shield bot. Barak is very easy to do this on. You set your turrets up, you put your shield up, you think you're pretty much done, but you're not. You need to be able to put pressure where pressure is needed, protect your backline, whatever it may be. There's a ton of things you can do throughout the game that you may not be thinking of, but you need to, you know, open up to what you're doing, pay attention to what's going around you, and don't be afraid to push into the team to disrupt so your team can push up. It's not very intuitive sometimes that maybe the best thing to do is just rush in and cause as much havoc as you can to allow your team to get in to a place where they're doing a significant amount of damage or whatever it may be. You're not just a shield bot and you need to take action sometimes. The fifth tip is what I would like to call zoning. So a lot of people that I've seen after you win a fight, you just kind of stop. You stand on point, capture that percent, whatever it is, you're just holding down that objective. And while that can be good, what I would highly recommend is after you finish a fight, push forward, especially with your DPS, leave one person on point, usually your healer because you can fall back to him. But everyone else is going to want to push forward, dismount the enemy, make sure they can't get back to point swiftly. You've earned that point. You better hold it. You want to keep it. You should have every route to the point contested by a team member with the healer sitting back on point, unless it's someone like Io who can just throw her pet on point and it's gonna capture for you. But yeah, you're gonna want to push up and like just make sure the enemy team doesn't have a free ride back to the point. It sounds like it's hard to do. It's really not. Even a single shot on someone is enough to dismount them and keep them from getting to point quickly. The amount of time spent just regularly walking compared to, on the horse riding back is significant, enough to easily capture a point. A lot of people don't do this because they don't know how important it is. You may not necessarily be going for a kill. It's just knocking them off the horse can be enough to guarantee that you get that point. With that said, just be sure not to die, right? It's better to retreat and live than die while you're pushed up. Again, it's that balance of tanks of when you need to be aggressive and pushing up and when you need to be, pulling back and helping the rest of your team. The sixth and final tip that I would highly recommend is body blocking. So, as a tank, you're this big, beefy character with a large health pool, but you also have a very large hitbox. This means that you can do something just, standing in front of a low health ally to give them more time to escape to cover and healing. Put yourself in between the enemy fire and them, give them as much breathing room as you can afford to keep them alive. Numbers advantage in these kind of games is massive. So trading off a little bit of your health, or a lot even, but saving your ally can almost always be worth, if as long as you don't die yourself. Again, it's that balancing act that I've said multiple times, and I know you're probably tired of healing it, right? And a lot of these tips kind of contradict each other, and that's normal, right? Being a tank is again this balancing act. You need to make space, but you also can't let your team die while doing it. You need to be able to pay attention to what your teammates are doing, even if you don't have voice comms. Watch how they're playing. If they're pushing up really aggressively and getting picks, but then trading off and dying, you might want to, just push up with them. Stay with them, enable them to do what they need to do. Try not to be selfish and just tunnel vision on what you think you should be doing. There's 100 different ways you could play almost every scenario, but making sure your team can play and be successful in what they're trying to do can be enough to win you the game without you even realizing it. All right, so before we end the video, I just kind of want to recap everything we've talked about so far. The 6 tips. Number 1, be aware, pay attention to what's going on around you, I should say, and being able to act on, what you're doing, adapt to what your team's doing, try and fit what needs to be done. Number 2, know your role. Play your role. If you're a point tank, be a point tank. Lock that point down, push up when you can. Make sure your team isn't dying. As an off tank, either push forward into their backline and cause disruption, maybe hold back and keep your team alive so they can continue doing what they need to do. Number 3, get off the point sometimes. You're a point tank, holding the point's your job, don't die over it. Fall back. Let your team breathe, give them a chance to catch up, and then re-engage. It's important to have your whole team together when you're doing that. Number 4, take action. You're not a shield bot. This one's pretty simple, but at the same time complicated. Don't just throw your shield up and pretend you're done. You need to make those disruption plays, make those opening plays, whatever it needs to be. Number 5, zone. After you win a fight, you're not done. Push up. Keep the enemy from having a free ride back to point. If you can, stagger them. What I mean by that is, if their whole team dies and one person pushes out prematurely and you take them out, that's a good 10 seconds before they're back in the fight with their team. Numbers advantage plays a big role. Number 6 is body block for your smaller characters, for your DPS, for your flanks, for your healer. It doesn't matter. Give them that room to breathe, heal, and be able to get back into the fight instead of dying and having to wait that whole time for them to get back. You're down a person. It's all a balancing act. Learning that balancing act can be incredibly difficult, but it can be so rewarding when done well. A really well played tank can absolutely dominate a game. Maybe not in the DPS charts, but keeping everyone alive. They're kind of this, unsung hero of the boards. They don't have a lot of kills. They're not going to do a lot of damage. But what they do and what they do well isn't always going to be outwardly seen. Before the video ends though, I do want to thank Blossoming Fate for putting in a lot of work and helping me with this video. They sent a ton of information over that really helped. I really appreciate it. Shout out to them. Thank you for clicking on the video. I'm hoping you learned something, or you were able to take away something from this video and the guide that I'm putting out. If you have anything that you do want me to cover, or if it's a specific champion, whatever it may be, just let me know down in the comments. If you did learn something or you enjoyed the video, hit that like button, subscribe, because I'm going to be doing more of these. I'm really enjoying it. Thank you.